Let not your heart be troubled. You are listening to the Sean Hannity Radio Show podcast. So like many of you, I have trouble sleeping. I have insomnia. No matter what I tried, it wouldn't work until I met Mike Lindell, and I got my very own MyPillow. It has changed my life. What makes MyPillow so different is MyPillow's patented adjustable fill. In other words, you can adjust the patented fill to your exact individual needs so you get the support you need and want to help you get to sleep faster and stay asleep longer. Just go to MyPillow.com or call 1-800-919-6090. Remember, use the promo code Hannity. When you do, Mike Lindell will give you his best offer ever. Buy one pillow and get another one absolutely free. MyPillow, made in the USA, 10-year unconditional warranty, and it has a 60-day, no-questions-asked money-back guarantee. You have nothing to lose. So it's time for you to start getting the quality of sleep that you've been wanting and we need. Just go to MyPillow.com or call 800-919-6090. Promo code Hannity. Take advantage of Mike's special 2-for-1 offer. MyPillow.com, promo code Hannity. All right, glad you're with us. 800-941-SEAN, our toll-free telephone number. You want to be a part of this extravaganza. We're in our nation's capital. In other words, the swamp and the sewer and the disgusting pit that is, well, Washington, D.C. You don't believe it? Just look at Congress. We're loaded up today. I cannot for the life of me believe that we have unfolding before us in this country numerous scandals that when you get to the core of them, it is, well, how do you even say? It is Watergate, which was about a break-in and a cover-up. It makes, if you want to use a what level of school you're at, it makes Watergate look like nursery school. And this is like now you're getting your doctorate and how corrupt and dangerous politics can be. That's the difference. And the fact that the media, and we'll talk about the issues that they're talking about today in a little bit. Obviously, the president, his comments. Although Sonny Perdue, I just noticed this just came in. Tom Cotton and Sonny Perdue said they were there. They didn't hear what Dick Durbin says that he heard. I don't even want to get into it to that extent. But they're never going to touch these stories. Or Nancy Pelosi's comments. We'll touch on that, too. We have Ed Henry and Joe Concha and Ari Fleischer, and they're going to join us today. And the Gobby one, I'm sure she has a lot to say about all of this. Katie Hopkins is going to join us. You never know what she's going to talk about. Juanita Broderick wrote a book about the experience that she had with Bill Clinton. You know, with everybody in the Me Too movement. You know, up until and through 2016 and most of even 2017, that everybody on the left supported the Clintons. It didn't matter. There was no Me Too. There was no, well, wait a minute, why am I supporting a guy and a guy that's married to a woman, a guy that treated women this way, according to numerous women, numerous reports, and, you know, Paula Jones and Kathleen Willey and Juanita Broderick, and was defended at the highest level by his wife. If all those issues mattered, why did they support them? When they say that the issue of feminism is so vitally important and that these men, which, by the way, I actually agree with it. Some people in this audience were mad at me when I said, well, I actually like what Oprah said. Someone wrote me a note. Well, Oprah defended Bill Clinton. I didn't know she was friends with Bill Clinton. I didn't know that. And it is, if she ever ran for office, it would be a legitimate question. There'd be so many questions if Oprah wants. You want to get in the presidential arena, you're going to have to answer questions. The only one that got away with not answering a lot of questions was the anointed one, Barack Obama. I couldn't believe in that. I could not and cannot today, especially in light of the way the media treats Donald Trump. I couldn't believe that he was asked one time about Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn. One time. Domestic terrorists, New York City Police Headquarters, the Capitol. You know, of bombings that they bragged about of all days in the New York Times, September 11, 2001. Bill Ayers is, I wish we did more. And I'm like, okay, you're going to sit on boards with this guy, give speeches with this guy, and you begin your political career in the home of an unrepentant terrorist. And the only time Barack Obama was asked, now think about this through the prism of how the media today covers Donald Trump. And just think about it. If Donald Trump began his career in the home of an unrepentant domestic terrorist, are you telling me that in the course of a nearly 2-year campaign that he's only going to be asked one time about it, because that happened to Barack Obama. And the only time that Obama was asked about Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn, well, it's a result of me and this show. And that was George Stephanopoulos the day before he's hosting a debate. I bring up the topic. I said, are you going to ask him about Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn? And he said, who were they? He didn't know who they were. And then Obama was prepared for it because I've been beating the crap out of it, and the media ignores it.
There are two questions that I don't think anybody has asked Barack Obama, and I don't know if this is going to be on your list tomorrow. One is the only time he's ever been asked about his association with Bill Ayers, the unrepentant terrorist from the Weather Underground, who on 9/11 of all days in the New York Times was saying, I don't regret setting bombs. I don't think we did enough. When asked about it by the Politico, David Axelrod said they have a friendly relationship and that they had done a number of speeches together and that they sat on a board together. Is that a question you might ask?
Well, I'm taking notes right now.
September 11, 2001, of all days, there was an article in the New York Times, and there are a number of quotes about Bill Ayers, and the Politico had in there the comments about from David Axelrod. I think that's an interesting question that nobody in the media has really brought up. We've highlighted a little bit more here on this program, but let me see if I can help you. You want any more questions?
Yeah, keep going.
The Chicago Reader talked about and has comments of Barack Obama why he attended the Million Man March. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that, I don't think.
That's pretty. Didn't he write about that in his book?
I don't remember that in particular, but I know that he was quoted extensively in the Chicago Reader, December 8th. I forget the year. I'm going back a couple of years. Mm-hmm. My memory's not that good, George.
You can see George loved taking advice. He actually did ask the question. To his credit, I give him a lot of credit for it, but that was the only time. One of the things that I have figured out at this particular point in my life and my career is I just can't allow, and we'll get into the S-hole comments and we'll get into, the analysis of it. We'll get into Nancy Pelosi's comments, 5 white guys, and the media coverage of all. I promise we're going to get into that. But what amazes me, and the point I'm trying to make here is a very simple one. 2 days ago, I reported, and John Solomon and Sarah Carter reported, that this phony dossier that was lied about for a year in terms of who paid for it, that this phony Russian Fusion GPS Christopher Steele dossier literally was used before a FISA court. In other words, that was at least a part of the reason FISA warrants were then put on both candidate Trump and President-elect Trump. And the media in this country does nothing about it. Nothing. And then I think of all the other things that we've been talking about. And to think of the depths of this, you take any one of these stories and you say, Donald Trump did it. Donald Trump did it. And you know what the reaction would be. This isn't about media being dead. This is about media that is an extension of all things leftist. This is a media that is hell-bent on disenfranchising and delegitimizing a president and disenfranchising voters. And their ultimate goal, and it's so obvious, is they want to take this president and get him out of office, and it seems by any means necessary. And they'll do and say anything and even look foolish for a year on a conspiracy theory about Trump-Russia collusion, and they will ignore the fact that Hillary bought and paid for that Russian propaganda. They'll ignore that Hillary Clinton literally stole a primary election against Bernie Sanders. Don't take my word for it. Just read Donna Brazil's book. And the fix was in from the beginning, and it was rigged. They'll ignore a justice system that James Comey and Peter Strzok, who we now know, along with his mistress, Lisa Page, that they literally conspired to write an exoneration of Hillary Clinton before any facts were in, before the main people being investigated were ever even interviewed. That's not how justice works in America. And then on top of it, they did it because they wanted to put in the fix so Hillary could remain a candidate. And then on top of that, Hillary, they deny who paid all this money, $12+ million for this Fusion GPS dossier full of Russian lies. And then those Russian lies, and this is going to be a big story next week, apparently, my sources are telling me, were corroborated by somebody in Clinton world. And when you find out, it will shock you. And other developments that'll be coming out next week. And the media is ignoring it all. And if any of this was about Donald Trump, you know that their reaction would be different. Now, I'm not saying it's not important to cover comments that the president says and comments that any politician says. It is, and we covered it last night. We're going to cover it today, and we'll cover it tonight. But I'm looking right before me at an amount of corruption that, to me, is threatening our constitutional order and threatening equal justice under the law and threatening things like our Fourth Amendment rights against, unreasonable search and seizure. And I'm looking at the intelligence community weaponizing these powerful tools we give them, some in the upper echelons, not the rank and file. I love rank and file, the people that protect our lives every day. I'm not talking about them. Just like when I talk about corruption of Comey and others in the FBI, I'm not talking about rank and file. I love those guys. They're committed to keeping our community safe and doing the good work of bringing justice to those people that would bring, a lack of order to society. But when I look at, the team that Robert Mueller has put together, guys like Andrew Weissman, we learned last night from Sarah Carter that he met with journalists from the AP last April to discuss news with them and their outlets' investigation about Paul Manafort. And by the way, the day after the AP met with Andrew Weissman, they published a major expose on Paul Manafort and alleged money laundering. And Weissman, did he know he was being considered for a position on the special counsel? Did he know that, and when he was asked by Robert Mueller to join the team, did he not have a duty and an obligation to recuse himself because he was prejudiced? He prejudged the case in that particular. And then why Mueller would consider him in the first place because of his atrocious track record. And then, then you got leaking and surveillance and no minimization and unmasking and using raw intelligence, like in the case of General Flynn. Nobody seems to want to report or deal with these injustices and crimes. Or Hillary deleting subpoenaed emails, 33,000. Then acid washing, bleach bit, then breaking up with devices. And then we're short of uranium in this country, and Mueller knew about Vladimir Putin wanting a foothold in the uranium market. And then even in spite of knowing about bribery, extortion, money laundering, kickbacks, Mueller let CFIUS approve Uranium One's deal. And then you got the money to Clinton Foundation. Then you got the whole Debbie Wasserman Schultz thing. I'm not saying that the media's coverage bias is shown in many ways. One of the ways you show bias is by what you choose not to cover. If you're going to only cover Trump-Russia collusion and ignore the multitude of issues here, that means you're biased. And it's abusive bias, and it's all designed to undo an election and delegitimize a president the American people need to be working for them. These are incredible times we're living in. All right, as we continue from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., 800-941-SEAN is our toll-free telephone number. You want to be a part of the program. So last night, Sarah Carter tells a story about Andrew Weissman. And I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at the report the night before. And I'm thinking at the time of this conversation, Weissman was the head of the Justice Department's fraud division. And then he goes on to join Mueller's team. And then I think of the rest of the team that Mueller put together. And I think of the $50,000 that the team donated to Democrats like Obama and like Hillary Clinton and the DNC. And then I'm thinking, okay, then we got the phony dossier. Then we got Uranium One. Then we got the email server scandal. Then we've got absolute proof positive that multiple laws were broken. And on top of it, then we've got an abuse of power issues involving the FBI, the DOJ, the Department of State, and Justice. And I'm looking at all this, and I'm like, where's the news media? If Donald Trump bought and paid for a dossier with the most salacious material about the Clintons. And then I'm not talking about what we already know about Bill, but like hookers in the Ritz in Moscow urinating on beds, because that's the kind of crap that was in the dossier. And I'm thinking, and if for a year you don't find out who paid for this dossier, but then you find out that it was really paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC that she's controlling. And then you find out that, oh my gosh, they used it to surveil an opposition candidate in an election year, presidential election year, and again, paid all this money. And it turns out not to be true. And then it's used to get a warrant on the opposition party. And then so you can spy on a president-elect. And then the information is spread by these, by this sycophantic bubble that we now call the news media. Look, all these other issues they've been hearing about all day, I'm not saying they're not important. We'll deal with them today as we dealt with it last night, as we'll deal with it all tonight. But I am saying these are the biggest stories that any reporter would ever be able to delve into in the course of a lifetime. And yet the media is so corrupt that they won't even touch it. And I'm telling you, it's getting to the point that they're not going to be able to ignore it. And it's getting to the point that everything they have basically reported on and told you for a year has been a lie, a big conspiracy and lie, and that all of this other stuff is coming true. All right, 25 now till the top of the hour, 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program. I just want to go back, and I want to stay on this for just a second here in light of the report that Weissman, who meets with the AP about Paul Manafort, and it's Weissman is the guy that is looking into Paul Manafort. So he goes into this whole special counsel as having literally prejudged the whole case, leaking to the Associated Press. Now, I don't know if I'm not Paul Manafort's attorney. If I was Manafort's attorney, I would take this information and I would absolutely begin to beat the crap out of it on top of everything else. I mean, it was actually an act of genius. The media laughed at it, but it really was smart because he was challenging Robert Mueller's, this is the problem with any special counsel. There's no limit to what it is that they're eventually going to focus on. You would think at this point in the investigation, we'd be doing an interim report and that the interim report would say about the president that we're no longer looking at the president. Because the president made a great point this week. It is hurting the American people in terms of distracting and taking away time from everybody. And if we don't have any evidence at this time, you got to ask yourself, well, what are we doing this all for? Because we do have an awful lot of evidence of other crimes committed, and that's the whole point. The media is not reporting that the Clinton Foundation now has been under investigation for months. Months. There's no reporting on it except for me and John Solomon and Sarah Carter and Greg Jarrett and Victoria Tunsing and Tom Fitton, and there's a few of us. And then you got members of Congress like Freedom Caucus members, Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and a bunch of others. Weissman's history is, you got to look at this guy's background because it's pretty unbelievable. He has a history where he leads this obstruction of justice case against Arthur Andersen Accounting in the Enron accounting scandal. Okay, if there were crimes committed, I want the crimes to be found out. Well, it turns out that Arthur Andersen they go out of business. Okay, maybe it doesn't affect you in any way, but it did affect tens of thousands of your fellow American citizens, and that means that they lost their jobs. And I'm sure if we dug down deeper, that would mean some of them lost their homes, and some of them lost their cars, and some of them lost their ability to send their kids to a decent school, and some of them probably ended up going bankrupt as a result of it. You never know. Then it turns out that on top of everything, that, he destroyed the company. All these people lose their job. What happened to that verdict? He got a verdict of guilty in an obstruction of justice case. The only problem is the verdict was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court 9-0. Now, you don't get a lot of 9-0 Supreme Court votes, especially in this day and age of 5 versus 4. You just don't. So it had to be pretty overwhelming, and we've had on Sidney Powell to explain the case to you, so I'm not going to go over all the details of it now. But people's lives were destroyed. It's a big problem with overly aggressive prosecutors in the first place. You know, I guarantee you, and I have no facts to back this up. Why are you laughing? That's funny, right? You can put your mic on. What?
I didn't know that we were becoming like the MSM. We're just going to say whatever we think.
Well, I'm just doing what they do.
I'm taking a page out of Michael Wolff's book.
Okay.
I believe this possibly might not, but maybe could be, if I thought this was true, maybe true. Yes.
Okay, so you have a grand jury in D.C., where I am today, the swamp and the sewer.
It really stinks.
Where it does not stink, actually. It just stinks. It's just corrupt.
This is very true.
It's a cesspool of corruption.
It's terrible.
And so we're in this city. Okay, what about 4% of the vote in D.C. went to Donald Trump? Okay, let's have a grand jury against people that work for Donald Trump's campaign.
Yeah, it's insane.
They're really going to get a fair trial here. They're really going to get a fair shake from a grand jury. Remember, and a lot of people don't even know what the grand jury process is. Grand jury process, you only have prosecutors presenting their case, and they don't have to present it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not the standard. And the standard's so low, that's why you get the phrase, you can indict a ham sandwich, because you actually could. So Paul Manafort, understanding all this, how much do you want to bet? I would bet a lot of money that Paul Manafort was put in a room and basically said, you're going to admit you lied to the FBI. Now, how did they know he lied to the FBI? My guess, my strong suspicion at this point, and time will tell, is that the surveillance and the lack of minimization and the unmasking of General Flynn and the leaking of raw intelligence, which is a felony and a crime, resulted in the FBI questioning him about facts that they already knew. And he didn't say something remember it properly, so that's lying to the FBI. And then they said, you're either going to sign this or we're going after your son, because apparently his son did some business with him in terms of some of the work that he did abroad, which, by the way, is perfectly legitimate based on his area of expertise, which is serving his country for 30-some-odd years. And that's how it works in a grand jury. So you can indict a ham sandwich. And then you got people like Andrew Weissman. I don't think he gives a flying rip that he was overturned 9-0 in the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, Robert Mueller didn't give a flying rip about that failed record. And then he look, I know a lot of people, I don't like Wall Street. I hate Wall Street. I'm not a big stock market investor. I think part of it is gambling. I think the insiders always have the advantage. You know, people are asking me about Bitcoin now. I'm like, anybody that made money on Bitcoin probably made it a long time ago. Now, I don't know. Maybe it's going to triple. And you're going to say, Hannity, you idiot, I should have gone into Bitcoin when you said you wouldn't do it. I'm only telling you what I would do. I don't tell people how to invest their money. You figure that out on your own. But for me, you know, by the time it gets down to, let's see, the people that make the country great and the people that build our homes and do our plumbing and do our electrical and the receptionists and the doctor that's really just getting by because of Obamacare, or the lawyer. You know, everyone thinks every lawyer makes a lot of money. Some make a lot of money. Some just survive. And, you know, by the time we get involved in the investments, you know, it's usually late. Like, for example, the time to have invested in the stock market would have been, you know, a year and a half ago. I'm looking at the stock market headed towards 26,000, might get there, and maybe it goes to 30,000. You're going to say, Hannity, you dope, you could have made X, Y, and Z. You know how many times I've had this? You know, I got a financial guy that I work with, and how many times he said to me how rich I would have, could have, should have been if I would have done what he said. And I said, I'm not interested in it. I'd rather get it's like the tortoise and the hare. I'll just hang in there. You know, just keeping the money you have and making it grow in a safer way is not, to me, it's just not being reckless, because money's hard to come by. And in my lifetime, I've seen too many stock market crashes. And maybe growing up in a home with parents that lived through the Depression, maybe that has skewed my worldview, that my father and mother grew up kind of dirt poor, especially my father. And that's just how I remember my father when he heard, you know, what I made my first year at the Fox News Channel. It wasn't a lot of money, especially living in New York. He's like, oh, my God, you got to save all of that. Save it. because he thought it was going to go away the next day, because that's the mindset that he had growing up. And that was the mindset of my grandparents. And that's why I grew up in a family. I'm glad I did. So anyway, when, 4 Merrill executives, some of you don't like Merrill executives, maybe the Merrill executives, all right, they spend a year in jail each. Ha, good for that. Good for Weissman. Okay, the problem is they were not guilty of anything. And the problem is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals threw that out with Andrew Weissman. And with that track record, one has to ask, well, what the hell is Robert Mueller thinking? The man that, we keep hearing has such, incredible integrity. What do we do about him? Well, I only see Democrats that he appointed, and Hillary donors, and Obama donors, and DNC donors. No Trump supporters. Then you got anti-Trump people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And then you got Comey working with Peter Strzok. And Comey, in his draft, saying that foreign entities got a hold of Hillary's, top secret, classified, and special access program information. Well, if you're hearing me say this and you're not hearing it anywhere else, you got to ask yourself, well, why is it? Either Hannity's off the deep end, or the media is everything that Hannity says it is. I'm talking in the third person like I'm not here. But if it's that corrupt, we've got a problem. This is why I question the decision of Robert Mueller. This is why the appointment of this special counsel, to me, is an unmitigated disaster. Why would you appoint anybody that has political prejudice, the likes of which we're seeing here? Why would you appoint a guy like Weissman? Why would Mueller fill his team with a bunch of Democratic donors? 50 grand to Democrats. And, then of course, we have the Clinton bought and paid for dossier. How is it possible she rigged the primary, no consequences? She had Comey and Strzok obviously put the fix in and rig the whole email server investigation when the evidence is overwhelming and incontrovertible. The media doesn't. Why are you talking about Clinton? Because it's a threat to our Constitution. It's a threat to equal justice under the law. It's a threat when we have surveilling and unmasking and leaking intelligence. It's a threat to, unreasonable search and seizure. It's a threat if the dossier that Hillary bought and paid for after she won a rigged primary, she's trying to rig a general election. She got a pass by the FBI who rigged her from having to face charges that the rest of us would have to face. And then on top of it, that is used in part, and according to some of my sources, has played a significant role in getting the FISA warrant to spy on a candidate and then a president-elect and his entire team. Well, that's a lot bigger than Watergate and a break-in and a cover-up of the break-in. So, we've confirmed all of this, surveilling the Trump campaign. This is not the only incident. It goes way beyond that. People are so concerned about Russia collusion. Well, there is a Russia collusion story, and I just told it to you. Because if she's paying for it and we're getting Russian propaganda bought and paid for and lies from Russia to influence the American people before an election and spy on opposition candidates and spy on a president coming into office, that's a pretty serious big story. So instead of the real collusion, which involves Hillary and the DNC spending millions of dollars trying to influence the election, they just keep regurgitating the same lies that they have been telling you now for a year. It's unbelievable to me. But it's also what our truth and our reality in this country is right now. By the way, according to the Fifth Circuit in that case with Andrew Weissman, it was the United States versus Brown that sent 4 Merrill Lynch executives to prison for a year for an indictment of alleged conduct that was not criminal, while the prosecutors plainly suppressed evidence favorable to the defense. Hello? That's Andrew Weissman. That's the guy. That's Mueller's guy. Mueller was the director of the task force for the case, and he was its driving force. According to one report that I read, he was, omnipresent in this whole thing. And in the courtroom and in the grand jury and throughout the investigation. Took 6 years for him to fail this spectacularly and uncover evidence that people like Weissman used. 6 years. Yeah. But anyway, put that to the side. And then Donald Trump fights back, and people in the liberal media are outraged that he fights back. Well, why wouldn't he fight back? He has nobody else on his side. Certainly there's nobody. I've never seen the media. They're just like a bunch of sheep, and they're lazy, and they're overpaid for what they do, and they feign outrage all the time. And I'm speaking this, by the way, as an irredeemable deplorable. I am speaking this as somebody that is guilty. I am bitterly clinging to my God, my Bible, my guns, and my religion. That's what some people think of us, as we all know. I'm one of those people. And maybe some of you are too. I plead guilty. Irredeemable, deplorable. There's so much fake news in terms of what they report and fake news in terms of what they refuse to report. You know, just go back for a moment here. You know, Christopher Steele. Do you know that Fusion GPS never even looked, never even questioned the information he put out? Anyway, 800-941-SEAN. I've got so much to get to today. We are just hitting the surface of the program. And we've got Juanita Broderick coming up, Katie Hopkins, Ed Henry is going to join us, Joe Concha, Ari Fleischer, and Sarah Carter. Sarah Carter at the top of the hour. She's joining us in our Washington studios. All right, glad you're with us. Hour 2, Sean Hannity Show, 800-941-SEAN, our toll-free telephone number. If you want to be a part of the program, we're in the swamp, the sewer that is Washington, D.C. Now, we got the latest on the breaking news. I know, well, obviously the issue of the president's comments. There are 2 senators now that are saying they didn't hear it, not saying it didn't happen, saying they didn't hear it about, quote, asshole. And then we got Nancy Pelosi's comments about 5 guys that apparently annoyed Steny Hoyer, that he spoke out about it. We have Joe Concha, Ed Henry, and Ari Fleischer coming up about that. Also at the bottom of the hour, Juanita Broderick has written a new book. We'll talk to her. We got the gauby one. Katie Hopkins is going to join us today for some Friday fun. I did not anticipate to spend the whole hour going into how the media and how corrupt they are, covering all of these scandals that they just refuse to cover, but one of the people directly in the forefront of reporting all of this is Sarah Carter, investigative reporter, Fox News reporter. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thank you.
So you've had 2 big stories this week, one about Andrew Weissman, and I think that is a huge story, and I'm leaking to the AP. And then, of course, the FISA warrant obtained in part or substantially because of, depending who you talk about and who I've talked to, the FISA warrant that was issued against the president. The dossier, rather, was being used for that to obtain the FISA warrant.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 incredible, I think, pieces of information, and particularly with the dossier, when you think about that, I mean, an unsubstantiated dossier put together by a foreign agent at the behest of the DNC and Hillary Clinton, utilizing information provided by the Russians, and unsubstantiated. I mean, there are so many holes in that dossier and things that have been disproven, and to know that it was used in part or was substantially used to get a warrant to basically spy on Trump and his campaign and to listen in on phone calls and gather information is pretty incredible.
All right, let's start with this issue, and I think because you got to just lay it out. I mean, we didn't know. They denied for years Fusion GPS, and all they did was obfuscate. Now we know that it was, $12+ million, the Hillary campaign and the Hillary-run DNC, if you believe Donna Brazile, and I do on that point. She rigs the primary election. She gets a rigged investigation with Comey and Strzok. They write an exoneration before investigation. She tries to rig the general election with bought and paid for phony Russian propaganda, and then this phony propaganda she paid for is then used to surveil a candidate, then president-elect, and his team. Is that now all fact?
Yes. I mean, what we know is in April 2016, her attorneys, the attorneys that were dealing with, they were like the firewall between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC and Fusion GPS. They hire Fusion GPS, and who then hires Christopher Steele, former British MI6 officer, to begin investigating Donald Trump and his connections to Russia. And then in July 2016, the first installment of the dossier is given to the FBI from Christopher Steele. And then they trickled the rest of that dossier out through the rest of the year. And you got to think about this, Sean. I mean, he was accessing sources that were Russian, people that he had dealt with in the past. They knew, according to U.S. intelligence officials that I've spoken to, there is no doubt in their mind that the Russians, once Christopher Steele started asking questions, looked into Christopher Steele, who hired him, what was going on here, and figured out very quickly, because Fusion GPS has extraordinary connections with the Russians anyways. Remember, they're the same people that were lobbying basically on behalf of the Kremlin against the U.S. Magnitsky Act. I mean, the Magnitsky Act that was stopping Putin's friends from building businesses and purchasing assets in the United States. So it's very convoluted. And there's no doubt that the Russians knew this, and it was a disinformation campaign. Remember, the Russians were just trying to sow chaos. This is what they do. This is how their intelligence agency operates, and they were very successful at it because, look, we're still talking about it today, and the president is under the gun with this special counsel, and nothing has changed so far. I mean, I believe it will be wrapped up this year, but the Russians were very successful in this disinformation campaign, and now what we're seeing through the Hill, through Congress, as they're looking at all of this information, they're finding out, wow, this dossier is basically a bunch of lies. There's only a couple of things in here, which was open source anyways, that's actually proven fact. And that was just that Carter Page had gone to Moscow, and then the second piece was that Putin didn't like Hillary Clinton. Well, that was pretty much open. That was out there. But everything else is unsubstantiated and not proven.
But the general consensus of the media has always been that Putin wanted Trump. Now, why would Putin want somebody that's stronger on the international stage, not somebody a part of the tell Vladimir I'll have more flexibility after the election, tell Vladimir, that failed in the Russian reset, that worked obviously hard to give Putin a foothold in the uranium market in America. And by the way, why would they ever want a president that ever is pushing towards energy independence? And we now seen Anwar open and coal saved and fracking extended and drilling in the 48 states and on the coasts and in Anwar. Why would Putin ever want them when energy is the lifeblood of his economy? Why would he want that when we have more resources than he does?
It's a great point. It's the same issue that I dealt with when I was talking to Russian experts, people who in the intelligence community and analysts that have spent their whole lives studying Russia, studying Putin. And they said Putin really didn't care either way. And in fact, he was actually very nervous about Trump winning the presidency because he could engage him. And a lot of people don't talk about this, but the Russians were very nervous. They didn't know where President Trump was coming from. They couldn't gauge how he would maneuver himself, what his policies were with regard to Russia. So there was a lot of concern there. There was so much concern, Sean, that according to some of my sources that I've spoken to, Russian analysts who were looking at this, then former Ambassador Kislyak was making so many telephone calls just trying to figure out who this guy is, how he'll operate so he could report back to the Kremlin, because he really had no idea. So then to suggest that they were working in cahoots, it's false on its face if you're looking at the facts, because they really did not have any idea how to gauge President Trump. I think that they felt a disdain obviously, and that was very open towards the Obama administration. And they had certainly a number of issues with Hillary Clinton from Vladimir Putin's point of view. And he's a strange person to try to assess. A lot of people have said it's very difficult when they're building up a dossier on Putin. He's a tough person to understand. But he felt the same way about President Trump. And what the Russians wanted to do was sow chaos, discord inside the United States. This isn't about picking his guy or picking his gal. This is about a state, in a way, an enemy state in some ways, and their spy agency has always been one of the most visceral that we've had to deal with, doing what they do best, which is disinformation. They're spying. We know, in the United States, we've seen a number of arrests of former FSB or FSB agents being picked up. So if you just look at the facts just don't stand with what the Democrats and other people are saying that want to try to prove some type of collusion between President Trump and the Russian government. I mean, it's just not there.
What do you make? I mean, there's two ways to describe media bias. One is by the stories they choose to focus on. For example, the media has done a really, really good job of reporting a false story with false narratives, and they've done it breathlessly and bordering on hysteria now for how long? A year. But they've ignored all the stories you've been breaking, starting back last March when you came on with John Solomon and we talked about warrants that existed at Trump Tower that we now have proven true, and surveillance and unmasking and leaking intelligence. And then we get into Uranium One and Vladimir Putin and Mueller ignoring, let's see, bribery, extortion, money laundering, kickbacks. And then Hillary Clinton deletes the emails, and the fix was in by Comey and Peter Strzok. And we still have, what, about 9,000 text messages to go between Peter and his mistress, Lisa. And then on top of that, then we got the whole dossier thing, which is exploding before our eyes, which is, to me, all of these combined, each individually, is bigger than Watergate. But the media chooses not to even report what we're reporting.
Well, remember, Sean, I mean, for so long, they had been so focused on proving that there was this collusion narrative. They worked so diligently at it, and, you know, they believed it. They believed it from sources that were talking to them. They wanted to believe it. They didn't want to let it go. And all you have to do is go back to election night. I remember getting phone calls from people. I was in New York on election night. I remember I was covering the Trump campaign at the time, and when things started to turn and it appeared that it was going to be President Trump and not President Clinton, I was getting calls from people saying, are you watching CNN? Are you watching MSNBC? Reporters are crying. And then I turned around, it's all the reporters that were there with me, and I saw some reporters actually in tears. They were so devastated by this. And I remember how many of them, nobody wanted, at that point in the mainstream media wanted to be at the Trump victory party. They didn't think it was going to be a victory there. They were all over with Clinton, and it was just this big windfall, this devastation. And I remember thinking to myself, you're supposed to be reporters. We're not supposed to have these kind of feelings here. We're supposed to be reporting the facts.
It was a collective funeral on every network on election night 2016. Where are all these things now going? Because, for a while I was using the analogy we're peeling back the layer of an onion, one layer. But it now seems, Art Bell years ago wrote a book called The Quickening. It seems like now we've hit the top of the mountain in terms of unpeel. Now it gets a lot easier, and we're sort of headed downhill, and I think news is going to come fast and furious. What do you see coming?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that. I believe the news is going to come fast and furious because now they're receiving a lot of the documents that they've been requesting for months, and I'm talking about the House Intelligence Committee. I'm talking about the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm also speaking with regard to the Inspector General's investigation. So I believe that all of this combined is going to start answering a lot of questions for us. First of all, they need to know who the FBI interviewed as far as witnesses to corroborate the dossier, if they corroborated anything at all, and if they didn't, why was it used as part of the evidence to get a warrant to spy on an incoming and then President-elect Trump? Because remember, it wasn't just before the election. This happened after the election. And remember how fast and furious the Obama administration was on gathering information and unmasking phone calls after he was elected. So there's going to be a lot of questions there and a lot of questions that need to be answered. So I believe in the coming weeks we're going to get a lot of revelations. I think FISA abuse is going to be one of them. And I also believe that questions to the dossier, as well as questions to Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, and his role.
All right, so hold this thought. Sarah Carter, investigative reporter, Fox News Channel, is with us. We also have at the bottom of the hour Juanita Broderick. We'll get into all these controversies, the president's comments, Nancy Pelosi's comments with Ed Henry and Joe Concha and Ari Fleischer coming up in the program. Hannity from D.C. tonight at 9. We hope you'll join us. The gobby one, Katie Hopkins, is going to join us. All right, as we roll along, Sean Hannity Show in Washington, D.C. Sarah Carter with us. All right, so we were talking about where all of this is going to go. We're talking about how the media has pretty much ignored it. And I see every one of these as infinitely bigger than Watergate. Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it on its face, this is, talking to sources who are in the intelligence community and law enforcement community. Remember, a lot of the Bureau, the field agents in the FBI, they're the ones that I've spoken with at least, are just stunned by what's happened in Washington, D.C. These are people who work every day to defend our country. They're stunned at the behavior of agents in high positions like Peter Strzok, like Lisa Page, who was the attorney working underneath Andrew McCabe, things that have happened even with regard to McCabe and former FBI Director James Comey. So this is big because this appears on its face to have been a concerted effort to insulate and protect Hillary Clinton by the people that were closest to her, the people that supported her in very high
Sarah, what's so shocking and profound about it is she never would have been able to remain the Democratic nominee, and she stole the primary and rigged that. And they protected her, and she was trying through the dossier to rig the general election with bought and paid for Russian lies.
Well, and this is it. I mean, if this would have been the reverse, had this been Trump doing this to somebody else, had this been somebody, even if you think about this, had this been the other side doing this to Barack Obama during an election, it would have been everywhere. It would have been on every television. It would have been on every newspaper, but it isn't. And now,
we only have 20 seconds.
Egg on their face.
What is that? Well, what does that say to the American people about their media in the 15 seconds we got?
The American people are smart. The American people know what's going on. And you know what? It doesn't matter what the media says. The truth is eventually going to come out, and they're eventually going to have to report it because it's going to be based on facts. And I have a lot more credibility in the American people and the way the American people think and in the truth than I do in unsubstantiated stories that are being run in the media.
Sarah, thank you. We'll continue.
Describe the scene where he was biting on your lip, and then when it was all over, he was leaving. Said, you better put some ice on that.
Yeah, and casually put on his sunglasses and walked out the door. And I've told my friend who came back and found me that I was sitting there crying and so upset at the time. And I felt like that the next person would be somebody coming through the door to get rid of the body. That's just about how I had absolutely couldn't believe what had happened to me.
You begged him to stop?
Yes.
Did you call her a narcissistic Looney Tune?
I am not going to comment on what I did or did not say back in the late 90s.
This woman, this little soft-spoken, pardon me for the phrase, dowdy woman, that seemed very unassertive, took a hold of my hand and squeezed it and said, do you understand everything that you do? I could have passed out at that moment. She was just holding on to my hand. She didn't, because I had started to turn away from her, and she held on to my hand, and she said, do you understand everything that you do? I mean, cold chills went up my spine. That's the first time I became afraid of that woman.
People have been harassing my husband for, I don't know, ever since I've known him.
I believe she knew it. Just like I said, it was a political relationship that they had. It wasn't a normal, average marriage. She didn't even stand up for the women that knew what her husband did, and she knew what her husband did to those women. There's no way that she did not know that.
Here they come again. We're going to have to just ride through this as we have so many of these other false accusations.
There's been a lot of people that's come up dead in Arkansas, and I've had a lot of people ask me, aren't you scared for your life? And actually, I have been.
We will destroy you, is what they said to me.
Who said?
My brother said it on behalf of Billy when he was campaigning for him in 1992.
I have to believe that it is in large measure motivated by people who just flat out disagree with the kind of politics and policies that my husband believes are best for America.
Feel you're in any danger? And at this point, people
Not
threatening
anymore.
you?
I used to.
You used to think that you were
was threatened
in physical
really,
danger?
Really, yeah, I was. I was very scared. I was horribly, horribly threatened. And people don't know that story.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that there are professional forces on the right at work for their own purposes and profit. There are just so many curious relationships among a lot of people and various institutes and entities. And I think that that deserves thorough investigation.
Why did you originally deny it, considering this was a legal matter?
Did you see what happened to Jennifer Flowers? Did you see what was happening to Paula Jones? My allegation. Yes. No, not afraid. I just knew what would happen.
All right, that was a montage going back over the years a little bit as it relates to Juanita Broderick, and she has a brand new book that has just come out, and it is called, you better put some ice on that, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton. Juanita, thank you for being with us. I read your book, and I learned things about you that I didn't know about your life, your background, your career, your son, and none of us have easy lives. And certainly you've had your share of difficulties. And you picked up on something. After Lisa Myers, I was the first person to interview you. And I remember when I was interviewing you and you were telling me this whole story. And anytime anybody asked me since then, I said, I believed you. And I never in my entire career had teared up in an interview. I didn't know you saw that. And you wrote about it.
I did, Sean. And I had to relate to it in the book because it caught me off guard. I could see tears welling up in your eyes, and I thought, oh, my gosh, yeah, it really moved me.
You're not the only one that I'm not the only one that happened to. Many people have told me that over the years, and it just rang true. And I remember what you said about Lisa Myers when she made this phone call to you, and she said, well, we've got a problem, and you're credible. You're too credible.
Oh, I know. I couldn't believe it. That's when I was questioning why the delay. It was supposed to have been played, 10 days after we recorded it. And she called and she said, I've got good news and bad news. And she said, the good news is you're credible. The bad news is you're very credible. And I didn't know what to do with that at the time.
Because I've got to believe, and I do believe, that Lisa Myers also saw what I saw in the interview, and it came across that way. And then the timing of NBC to release that was different.
Oh, isn't that the truth? And another thing that she told me that I really failed to put in the book is Tim Russert. When he saw the interview, she said he even teared up.
I knew Tim Russert. And I don't think Tim Russert agreed with my politics, but people like him and Peter Jennings were very, very interesting people to me because Tim Russert wanted to hear what I had to say. And I had a couple of occasions, one shortly before he passed away, and that was a sad, tragic death in his case. And I loved the book about his dad, Big Russ and me, and then he wrote a follow-up book to that. And both he and Peter Jennings literally wanted to listen to my point of view and hear what I had to say. And it doesn't surprise me at all. Were there other media people that maybe pulled you aside and said, hey, Juanita, I believe you?
Oh, yeah, there were numerous ones. But when they had the screening of all the executives and everything to see this, I just remember her telling me that Tim Russert, his response to it, and how he was ultimately the one that made this eventually be played.
Let me ask you about some other things here. You talked at length about not only your background in your life, but then you got into this year of 2016 and the night that you and Paula and Kathleen, I remember because I interviewed all three of you that night when you first entered the spin room, or that's what they call it. And I remember interviewing you there, and then you literally, that had to take a lot of courage at that moment in that part of the campaign. What was it like for you?
Oh, it was frightening at first, but you've got to understand we've been told to shut up for so many years, and Mr. Trump gave us this opportunity, and people kept saying to me, because the tapes and everything had come out, the Billy Bush tapes, and I kept trying to say, well, how can you support him? I said, how can you support a woman who victimized us as victims? When she knew what her husband had done to us.
I mean, that goes to the heart of it. And all of those years, she defended the indefensible. And all of those years, she, talked about right-wing conspiracies. And at some point, and then when she said last year during the election year, or 2016 during the election year, women have a right to be believed. And I was thinking about people like you, and I was thinking about people like Kathleen and Paula, people that I've gotten to know really well and come to like and view as friends.
Oh, I know. Well, you noticed that after that, and I relate to that she came out with her speech of all victims should come forward and be believed. But after I sent out my tweet that went viral, she took "You should be believed" from her website.
The title of this book that you have now put out, by the way, it's on, I guess, Amazon.com. Is that where? Because you self-published this book. Why did you make the decision to self-publish?
I couldn't get anyone to publish it. Every publisher that I contacted only wanted to know about my incident with Bill Clinton. And that doesn't make a person just because they have been victimized. There was so much more to my life that I wanted to share. And to be truthful with you right now, even though we self-published on Amazon until 2 days ago, it was a top 10 political bestseller.
That's amazing.
For some unknown reason, Amazon pulled it. And they won't tell us why. We had to rush real quick to get up a second showing of the book, but all of the
you mean the second printing of the book?
Now gone.
You mean the second printing?
No, the second notice on Amazon.
Now, did they put it back up or no? Yeah.
Yeah, the second notice is up now, but the first notice that had all of the bestseller ratings on it is gone. And when we put up our second one, those aren't attached to it. So we've lost those ratings, but we're still number one on Kindle.
Wow, that's amazing. So people can get it on Kindle, and they can get it on Amazon.com now again. We'll put a link up on my website, Hannity.com, for you. I remember you obviously got the title, and I remember when you told me this story, I sat there stunned that you just got raped, and he bit your lip and said to you, you better put some ice on that?
Yes, so callously, as he walked to the door and put on his sunglasses, and he motioned to my lip, and he said, you'd better get some ice on that, and walked out the door.
Last night on TV, we had Lara Logan from 60 Minutes, and I'm sure you remember the incident that happened to her when she was in Tahrir Square when they were overthrowing Hosni Mubarak and the Arab Spring and everything that happened to her. And I got a chance to talk to her a little bit before the show, and we were talking, and I just said, I'm so sorry that anybody would ever have to live through what you lived through. And it's the same thing with you. I mean, now that I've gotten to know you over the years, and I don't know where the inner strength comes from in some people, but the types of things that you've lived through, and she's lived through, some people never come back from because it is so traumatic.
You, that was a wonderful interview you did with that young lady. That was awesome.
Yeah. But you probably have talked to people over the years that have gone through this, and I think you know what I'm talking about. It's not – you were able to become a survivor in spite of the most horrific thing happening to you. Not everybody can do that.
Yeah, and people ask me, well, how could you still be a successful businesswoman? I absolutely threw myself into my job and my businesses to try to forget. And I think that's one of the reasons.
This hurt your marriage at the time. When you decided and you made the decision to talk about it, that hurt your marriage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it definitely ended my my second marriage. It was something that he did not want me to come out about. And I can understand. We live in a small town, and it was hard for him. But after the Dateline interview, we just grew apart. It was just too much for both of us.
Yeah, well, I think anybody can understand that. I really do. It's been listen, I've known you now for a long time, Juanita. When I read it, I didn't know that you saw it, and I remember feeling it. I remember how I felt, and I remember literally biting the inside of my cheek, if that makes any sense to you. To kind
it does. I can, yeah.
You know, because it was so hard to.
I can still remember us sitting there at my table and me looking at you and feeling sorry for you, you know.
No, well, I just felt it was one. I think to date, and it was the hardest interview I ever did. I think, and yeah, Lisa Myers was right. You were too credible because I believed you from the first minute.
Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate it.
That book now, Juanita Broderick's book, we'll put it up on Hannity.com. It's on Kindle. It's on Amazon.com. You better put some ice on that, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton. 800-941-SEAN is our toll-free telephone number. Thank you so much, Juanita, for being with us. We'll take a quick break from D.C. All right, as we continue from our nation's capital, 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of this extravaganza. All right, let's go to our busy phones here as we say hi to Sean is in Palm Beach, Florida. Sean, how are you? Glad you called.
Fine, thanks. Thanks for taking my call. I just have to say this week I've had it with liberal women, Oprah Winfrey. You know what? I just have to say to Oprah, if she wants to be a presidential candidate, she needs to be a candidate for all women. Women like Juanita Broderick, your guest. Women like Juanita Broderick and others that have been sexually assaulted by former President Clinton, that have been protected by another liberal, Hillary Clinton. I've also had it with Elizabeth Warren saying that we promised Dreamers that they could have amnesty. No, they never should have been promised amnesty because Dreamers are illegal. So I have just about had it with liberal women, and I've said my...
It is interesting that every single time any of these issues come up, then you've got to deal with what? How many years of Democrats, the left, defending the Clintons and their indefensible behavior? Now, all of a sudden, these things matter. I don't believe they're honest and true because the Clintons, they were friends with Weinstein, they're friends with Hollywood, and everybody knew about Juanita and Paula and Kathleen and all these other women. You know, they've had opportunities for Me Too for a long time. And I don't remember, or, up to and including all of 2016, every one of these groups, every one of these, Democrats out there that, and by the way, it is the right cause. It is the right thing to do. I don't want people abused ever, under any circumstances. But they never did it then. All right, we'll continue.
Coming up next, our final news roundup and information overload hour.
The 5 white guys, I call them, I thought they going to open a hamburger stand next or what? That could have been done 4 months ago. The very idea that this week they're saying, oh, why don't we get 4 white guys and General Kelly to come and do this.
All right, that's Nancy Pelosi and her comments. Steny Hoyer, now she is coming under fire. The president's been under fire for the comment that he made that he says that he didn't make, that Sonny Perdue says he didn't make, and that Dick Durbin says he did make about immigration and these countries that are beep holes and so on and so forth. Here with a full report on all of this and the very latest out of Washington, where we are today, is Fox News Channel's Ed Henry. What's going on, sir?
Well, good to see you, Sean. Yeah, I mean, look, just in the last couple of moments on the president's comments, breaking is that Lindsey Graham, who was also in the room with Dick Durbin and the president in the Oval Office when they met, is giving a slightly different account as well. He's not directly saying whether the president said that comment or not, but he's saying, quote, following comments by the president, I said my piece directly to him yesterday. The president and all those attending the meeting know what I said and how I feel. I've always believed that America is an idea, not defined by its people, but by its ideals. So bottom line, Lindsey Graham is not confirming or denying it, but I think what he is doing is saying, why in the world did Dick Durbin decide to go to the media and reveal what happened in a private meeting? Instead, I think Lindsey Graham is saying something was said, and I told the president to his face what I thought about it, and now let's get on with the business of reforming immigration. I think Dick Durbin obviously took a much different approach.
All right, let's talk about, is the Pelosi comment getting much play?
It's not. And, I mean, this is something that normally should, right? I mean, if the president makes a comment like he did, or at least allegedly did, I mean, he's now denying it, as you say. You have a Republican like Mia Love out in Utah saying, look, I come from Haitian descent, and I think the president should apologize. And the mainstream media jumps all over that, and rightly so. It's somebody in his own party, right, saying this. Now you have Nancy Pelosi making her comment about it's 5 white guys deciding this, and somehow she's offended by that. Well, Steny Hoyer, her number 2 in the Democratic leadership, as you said, he says that's offensive. He's one of those 5 white guys. And I think he was basically saying, just because I'm white doesn't mean I can't understand, the immigrant experience or figure out how to reform immigration. And yet you're not seeing a whole lot in the mainstream media about this.
What's the latest on that immigration bill? There was a conflict yesterday about whether or not a deal was reached, and the White House said they did not reach a deal.
Right. They definitely do not have a deal. I think what you had is some more moderate folks like Jeff Flake, who is very much against the president, has made that clear, is trying to make this a done deal by saying, hey, folks, we've got a deal here. And then when the president saw the fine print, he said, no, we don't have a deal. I think other things, there's not funding for the wall. Instead, there's sort of this vague dollar figure for quote-unquote border security. And I think a lot of people are going to be skeptical of that. And then I think on DACA, the details are such that it's not just some sort of legal status for the quote-unquote dreamers, the children of illegal immigrants who have been here. It's actually some sort of legal status for their parents who came here and brought them here illegally. So that seems to me to be kind of a curveball here, because this debate had been, do you let, pull the heartstrings, these are the children, it's not their fault. And now all of a sudden this quote-unquote deal would allow the parents who knew what they were doing and came here illegally to all of a sudden have some sort of legal status, not immediately, but over the course of years. And I think that makes it very clear that the president's not signing on to that.
All right, Ed Henry in Washington. We'll see you on Hannity tonight at 9.
See you tonight, buddy.
As we now are joined by Joe Concha. He is with The Hill, along with Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary. Thank you both for joining us. Let's start with you, Ari Fleischer. Your thoughts?
Well, this is a tricky issue, but if there's anybody who can do it, it's Trump. This is the going to China moment that Nixon had, and I think that's an old expression, but in this case a perfectly valid one. His predecessors couldn't do it. Barack Obama couldn't. My old boss, George W. Bush, couldn't do it. Trump could, and it would be a tremendous success for him. And the Democrats have got to learn one simple word, and it's compromise. They're not going to get what they want because Trump is tough, and he will deport people if they're here illegally. So they want the law changed. They need it changed, and they need to give them the wall. There's nothing wrong with a wall. We have walls already.
But
so
a lot of conservatives, Ari, are worried because what he said in that meeting, although he clarified it both on Twitter and in other comments that he's made, and he even made that day, but people isolate comments, and that is that there's no DACA without the wall. And what every conservative is saying is, well, we always get the spending increase. We never get the tax cut. We always get the amnesty or consideration, and we never get the wall. I just think the president has run so heavily on this wall that wall is going to be built.
I agree with that, Sean. He has to do it. He has to do it. You cannot run on it and promise it the way he did and fail to deliver. So his remarks caught me by surprise, too. But at the end of the day, I think Donald Trump knows that. And at the middle of the day, and he didn't at the beginning of the day, but he knows it now.
What's your take on all of this, Joe Concha?
Well, I think that President Trump, obviously, those were comments that he probably, he didn't think we're going to leave the room. And I can guarantee you, if we were all recorded in our private conversations across this country, we're going to have some things that probably come out that we would want back as well. I'm not justifying it. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that what it tends to do in these situations is it steps on so much of the good news that we saw this week. Sean, I mean, when you think about it, the Dow was up 250 in one day. You had that great bipartisan immigration meeting on camera that everybody, including the left, was applauding. The South and North Korea actually meeting. Who thought we'd say that a couple months ago? Companies continuing to get big bonuses to employees. I mean, all this good news, and now last night, today, the Sunday talk shows, all we're going to talk about is debate whether Donald Trump is a racist or not. And here's what I know. Ever since he came down that escalator in June of 2015, and he said what he did about Mexicans, and he ran for 18 months, and Donald Trump was being Donald Trump. He's unfiltered. He is inartful in terms of the way he communicates, but many of his supporters
are you convinced
he
said it?
Across as authentic.
I mean, when you
Am I convinced he said it?
When you have Sonny Perdue and Tom Cotton and the president himself saying saying, yeah, he used a bad word, but he wasn't saying it in that context. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think context means a lot, and I think Ed Henry brought up a very good point, and that is, what is Dick Durbin doing running to the press in these situations and sharing that sort of thing if he wants to get a deal done? So Purdue and Cotton, they didn't actually, outwardly deny it. They just said they did not recall, and there is a big difference there, as Ari would probably agree with.
No, I agree.
It's very precise language. Yeah. So,
but I mean, they're saying they were in the room and they were part of the negotiations. Ari, what's your take on it?
Well, look, I've been in the Oval Office. I've heard things that need to stay secret, and there are things that if you say them in the Oval or anywhere, if they're so jarring, you're guaranteeing them they're going to get out. So don't expect people in Washington to behave. Watch what you say. And in this case, I do think the president, by all reports, used language that's probably not the best way to get an agreement. And I just don't think it's the right way to handle diplomacy. I'm all for blunt talk, tough talk, straight talk, but sometimes you can go too far. And I do suspect, Sean, one way or another, that is what happened here. And there's a bigger picture now. All right, it was said. What are you going to do? You still have to get an agreement, and you still have to build a wall. You still have to deal with chain migration and the other issues the president, to his credit, has brought up. And I long, and you know this, Sean, have been for immigration reform. I do think there's a lot to be said for people who come to the shores of this country and make a better life for themselves and for the world. And the truth is, people who come to America, people who immigrate anywhere, are among the best, because the people who are among the worst are the ones who stay put. If you got to get up and go to leave your homeland behind because you're searching for a better life, you've got some gumption. And that's what's always made America a great country. I'm the son of an immigrant who came here from what you could use that dirty word to describe where she left right before World War II, when the Nazis were about to take over her country. And she came here legally. And that's why I'm so powerfully pro-legal immigrant. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of illegals here. I'd like to figure out a compromise that builds the wall and gets this issue behind us.
Do you think, well, I think that's what the deal is going to be, Ari. I think it's going to be the wall. I think it's going to be the end of chain migration. I think we're going to have merit-based immigration, and I think that the price or the compromise, whatever you want to call it, is going to be DACA. And I think a lot of Republicans, although they don't say it publicly, often privately, are saying they want DACA, and that therein lies, if the president wants the wall, if people want the wall, that's going to be the compromise. And I'm just looking at what I think the reality of it is. But I think it should be a heartbeat. I think you got to build the wall first, because you'll never get it built. Remember, we got 2013. You never get the money appropriated eventually.
Well, we're now talking about appropriations. They need to appropriate it, and you've got a Republican president for the next 3 years. So once it's appropriated, if it's not built, it's Donald Trump's administration's fault. So Trump is in control. His administration can and will build that wall if they appropriate the money. That's up to Donald Trump. He'll do that.
Yeah. What is your take on?
It doesn't have to be 2,200 miles, right?
No, 700.
You can get a couple of hundred. Yeah, 700 in obviously the most heavily trafficked areas, which is pretty easy to determine, and use drones and technology in the other parts. I think every Trump supporter wouldn't have any problem with that.
What is your take, Joe, on the media coverage of all of this? Look, I don't watch these other networks, but the stuff I'm reading seems over the top, dropping, the N-word bomb and this bomb and that bomb. And what is your take? You have to watch this crap for a living.
Yeah, well, you have Phil Mudd, who's a counterterrorism expert on CNN last night, and he used the N-word 3 times just to make the point that he's not racist. And I think when you start using words like that, or you start saying S-hole over and over again, I get it when you're quoting the report. I have no problem with that. But when you repeat it like Jim Acosta did over and over again, you're using it as an attention prop. Look at me. I'm using swear words. That's going to get me some press after this. And that's unfortunately what we see from our media all too often. They say provocative things, and I'm not talking about pundits and opinion people. I give them a lot of leash, as you know. But actual anchors, when Anderson Cooper and George Stephanopoulos, who are supposed to be anchors and objective, go on the air and declare that the president is a racist, that is not responsible in any capacity, because half the country is probably saying, wait, he wasn't making a racial argument. He was making an economic argument or an immigration argument, or he was standing up for the American worker. When you make declarations like that as anchors, that's why people hate the media so much, because you're going well beyond your job description.
We'll take a break. We'll come back. Ari Fleischer, Joe Concha are with us as we continue. Hannity tonight from Washington, D.C. The gobby one, Katie Hopkins, at the bottom of the hour. That ought to be entertaining. And our Florida-Georgia Line Friday concert series continues as we continue from, the sewer and the swamp that is known as Washington, D.C. All right, as we continue, Ari Fleischer is with us, and Joe Concha the Hill is with us. Ari, you gave out some really interesting numbers on media bias last night on Hannity. I want to give you a chance to repeat it.
Sean, I keep a running tally of these things. I just keep my eyes open.